Every institution that's 2,000 or so years old goes through some changes. The papacy and the roles of the popes in society has changed incredibly over the past 20 centuries. Now, many scholars have tried to break the history of the popes and the Western, Latin, Roman Catholic Church into different eras or epochs. I'm no expert or anything like that, but I do like to break things up and organize them as much as anyone else, so this is my attempt to tie a complex history into a nice, neat bow. I will rely heavily on my sources, but interpretations are my own, so don't blame any of the sources for this. My grouping today is going to purposefully be really overly broad in scope. Any of these eras that I lay out could be subdivided into any number of sub-eras, especially at least one of my eras, which you'll learn about in just a moment or two. This is really, I guess, a way for me to organize my thoughts on the topic, and I'd love to hear what you have to think or any of your criticisms in the comments below. The papacy and / church is an institution that's rapidly closing in on 2,000 years of age. That's a long, long time. I've divided the history of the church and popes of Rome into 5, possibly 6, but I'll get into that, so make sure you stay tuned until the end of this video. We start off with the ancient period from St. Peter to Sylvester. So this includes the conversion of Constantine and starts in roughly the 40s, 50s-ish AD CE to 325 CE. Then I have late antiquity, which runs from 325 to the mid-530s. The Byzantine domination of the papacy, so that goes from the 530s to the 750s. The Middle Ages, which goes from the year 700 to 1878, and then the Post-Middle Ages, which goes from 1878 until 2013. I'm toying with the idea of a modern or a postmodern papacy, which goes from 2013 to the present. So let's start with our very first period, the ancient papacy from St. Peter to Sylvester. Much of this time is really shrouded in apocrypha and a lack of primary source documentation. It's a time of great turmoil in the Roman Empire. Many popes are martyred. They're banished from the city. A very small church is founded in Rome that just continues to grow. Constantine's victory at the Milvian Bridge is a huge break for the papacy. Now, there's no mention of the Constantine ever meeting the sitting pope at that time, Miltiades, either before or after the battle, but there's a big issue of the next pope with Sylvester and Constantine. Now, I'm ending this period of the papacy with Pope Sylvester and the Council of Nicaea. Everything really changed with the Council of Nicaea. The papacy's stock would go up from there and it would never go down. Unlike your Bitcoin, which is going to go up and down, really the popes were on a pretty decent trajectory after that. Constantine granted the Church of Rome vast amounts of wealth and property. He did not grant the papal state, but a later forgery did, but it was really a connection to this time period that really got the papacy started. A really very different Roman church came out of this time. Now, the next 200 or so odd years is what we could call the late antiquity period, or the Ostrogothic papacy. The popes built up an independence from the Eastern Roman Empire, but they were still really connected to the East. They had to balance the Ostrogoths with the Byzantine influences that were going on in the Italian peninsula at that time. Later parts of this period, relations with the new bosses in towns, the barbarians and the Ostrogoths, would really heat up. The Ostrogoths allowed the papacy a great deal of latitude, and they basically let them run their own affairs. The papacy would just start to spread their wings as more than just a local diocese, but they're not yet the papacy of later times. Much of the ground of what the papacy would become was being laid down at this time, though. Now we have the Byzantine papacy, we have the Gothic Wars to the Franks. I think of this time period in the papacy as sort of the intermezzo. It's the intermission's really important in a play, but maybe not as important as other acts of the play. You know, I think a good intermission sets you up for a strong second half of the entertainment. The Byzantine papacy is a 200-year-long period where every pope, save one, was directly appointed or approved by the Eastern Roman authorities. Most of the popes at that time were from some sort of Eastern extraction as well, Greeks, Syrians, and or Greek/Syrians, born in the West, especially in Sicily and southern Italy, and some of them were even born in the East. The mid-530s saw the Gothic Wars, and this is when the Eastern Roman Empire under Justinian conquered the Italian peninsula. If the popes did what Constantinople wanted, it was pretty smooth sailing. If they didn't do what Constantinople wanted, they were in serious trouble, all the way to being banished and even tortured, and then banished. This was a renaissance of sorts for the popes and the West. Many Eastern customs would enter Western practice. They would become so commonplace you wouldn't even know they were Eastern. We have the saying the Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, that's Greek. Marian devotion, the Hail Mary, all come from Greek roots. Though West impacted the East as well. Again, this period helped build a sense of independence in the papacy. Even though the popes were dominated by the Byzantines, the trend was definitely towards the popes of Rome not wanting to be dominated by foreign or secular powers. Now we have my big one, and I call this phase 4 the medieval papacy, and that runs all the way from 751 to 1878. Now, the previous two eras were 200 or so years long on average. This one's 1100 years long. Why did I choose to extend the Middle Ages so long? The dates are important. 751, Pope Zachary gives the okay to Pepin to take over as the king of the Franks officially. 1878 is when Pope Pius IX died. There's two major themes here. Securing positions as the secular leader in central Italy for the Pope was huge, as well as balancing the powers in Europe, the great powers. The size of the papal states changed and the European powers changed over these 1,000 or so years, but in the end, somehow one of these two forces was in play in every single thing that went on in the papacy. You can throw in the Renaissance in there. Popes were still fighting over the papal states, playing politics with the French, the Holy Roman Empire, the Habsburgs, you name it. The 200 or so years of the papal bearded phase, same thing. Even during the Reformation, you had the same big themes. All that ended with the death of Pope Pius IX. The papal states were whittled down to just over 100 acres, or 44 hectares if you're playing metric at home. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around it, but that's a tiny bit of land. The block, if you live in a suburban neighborhood, is probably much larger than 100 acres. And on top of that, the second theme, the Pope's ability to directly influence foreign affairs went to basically nil as well. Now we have the post-Middle Ages papacy from 1878 to 2013. And it's really a time where the popes were trying to figure out what the role of the papacy was going to be now that it wasn't a state and it didn't have any hard power over international affairs, at least not what it once had. So it was really a matter of solidifying religious power, using soft power to influence European and international affairs, and trying to find a place in a world that was becoming increasingly secular, in the West at least, and also trying to grow in the more religiously conservative global South and East. balancing tradition with ecumenism, secularism, communism, capitalism, socialism, and every other ism you can really think of. Every pope has taken a little bit different tack on these issues, steering a course through issues such as sexual scandals, gay marriage, married clergies, and relations with other faiths in the world, whereas the Pope's decree isn't law and in many cases doesn't carry much moral authority either. Now we move into the Francis era. Pope Francis, he kicked all of these issues into high gear. He has issued some very strongly worded political encyclicals. He talks a great deal, but he doesn't give a lot of answers. He's shaken up the church with his pronouncements, but then, practically speaking, hasn't done much to change anything. The sexual abuse scandals and the financial scandals don't seem to be getting better, despite his rhetoric, and in many cases are getting worse. I don't think we're going to be able to really tell where Pope Francis sits on all of this, if he's still firmly rooted in that transitionary period after the medieval papacy, or if he really has started a new era, and we really not until maybe even a few decades after his papacy ended. If you want to enjoy episodes like this and many more like it, I highly suggest and I ask you to subscribe, ring the bell, and like this video to get more like this. And thank you, of course, to all our patrons on patreon.com/the history of the papacy. Join us there to support the show. And so this was our little bit of Papal and Church history in 10 minutes, and I will catch you next time.